Hello and welcome back to the Comparesoft ERP podcast. Today we're discussing ERP failures with Dr. James Robertson, an ERP troubleshooter with a civil engineering background who's been working with ERP and management information systems since 1989. In this episode we unpack how James defines ERP failure, who should be accountable when value is not delivered, and the practical steps businesses should take to avoid failure by following James's 7-step engineering methodology, which he calls the ERP Accelerator. We also analyse real-world examples, including Lidl's costly abandonment of their ERP program, and we walk through how James would diagnose and correct a failing implementation in just 2 days. James, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you with us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Looking forward to this session.
As am I. Before we get into analysing ERP failure as a concept, could you briefly share how you first got into the world of ERP? I know there's a really fascinating story involving your father's business and an Apple II computer.
Right. So I studied civil engineering at university, so bridges, dams, large buildings, and did a doctorate in construction of large dams. Ended up with 7,000 pages of laboratory data when the university mainframe couldn't store a page. And I got into the first desktop computers in the days of the Apple II and so forth. And my father was an investment consultant. He'd had a triple heart bypass. And he said to me, look, I've bought you this computer. Please computerize my business. So I got into SuperCalc 1 and Microsoft Basic Compiler, and I wrote built a couple of spreadsheets, and I built a database and presentation quality printing little application with a Daisy wheel printer. And the first year that I was working with him, I showed him what I could do with SuperCalc. He said, that's fantastic. Can you do 3 different scenarios, 3 different gold prices, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So I said, yes, fine, no problem, I can do it. So we went from taking half an hour to calculate one thing on a manual sheet to doing the whole bang tooth in seconds.
Wow.
And so he said, well, look, we've got this, they're changing the law with regard to tax at the end of the year, and we need to be prepared. So we ran scenarios for 3 different situations. The Minister of Finance presented his budget. My dad phoned me up at lunchtime and said, this is the situation. It's scenario number 2, and these are the lunchtime share prices off the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Punched those all into the software, jumped in my car, and drove into Johannesburg. I mean, remember, we're talking 1981 here, before fax technology was still a luxury. Delivered the printout to him. He had it faxed through to all his clients, and by 4:00 on the afternoon of the budget, they knew exactly what the impact of the budget was, and they could make buying and selling decisions before the Joburg Stock Exchange closed. It was so successful that he doubled his turnover in 12 months, despite the fact that he'd had a triple heart bypass. And that was where I discovered, by doing small, clever things with computers, you can make a huge difference to business. And that's stayed with me ever since. And there's much more I could tell about other exciting developments, but that was what started me on this journey. I saw what could be done, and I continue to see that it's not done in the majority of cases. And my passion is to help clients to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And obviously it's led to where you are today, and you describe yourself not as an ERP consultant, but more as an ERP troubleshooter or turnaround specialist. So
yes.
What I'm really intrigued to know, James, is how you define ERP failure. Like, does it have to be something catastrophic that's gone wrong?
No, not at all. If you just look at the example that I've just shared, in that case, failure would have been just ho-hum, hacked it, no difference, no increase in turnover. Another case study I share, the client, I enabled the client to do some things that nobody else could do, no other business could do, just with some little pieces of bespoke software around their new ERP. So much so that Dior came to them and said, we've heard what you can do in terms of account management. We want to give you our account. So there was a 12% revenue uplift overnight. And they were so successful that they had to build a much bigger distribution center because they were picking up clients left, right, and center. That is a successful ERP implementation, according to my standards. Very few organizations are getting that, and I consider that to be failure. If you're not getting real strategic value out of your ERP, if the ERP is not an organic part of your decision making at a strategic level, then it is falling short. If it's not giving you increased profitability, increased productivity, it's falling short. And I'm not talking about little gimmicky bits and pieces tacked on and added. I'm talking about the core ERP so well implemented that it enhances the business and makes the business more competitive. And anything short of that is failure.
And so some reports put failure rates between 70, 75%. I know a lot of people argue it's lower than that, but if we take your example there of like at a strategic level, you mentioned that failure rates are more closer to 95%. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's not widely reported because people are not asking the questions. But if you have the awkward, you see, the thing is, Ryan, I got into this way back in 1990, speaking at conferences about successes and having CEOs come up to me and say, Dr. Robertson, we really like what you have to say, but we don't have it. Come and help us. And so all through the 90s and into the early 2000s, I was doing these on a sort of ad hoc basis. Then in 2003, I wrote this book. If you can see it, The Critical Factors for IT Investment Success, which remains largely relevant today because the things are human and people and strategy and governance, etc., haven't changed much in the last 20 years. And then I started giving courses like why your ERP is not delivering and how to fix it. And so I got people whose ERPs were not delivering. And so I did more and more of that. And so that's where the ERP Dr. Monica comes from, is that I'm particularly good if your ERP is not meeting your expectations from anywhere sort of there to way down there and all the way to outright failure. I'll tell you why it's not in 2 days. I'll tell you why it's not delivering, and I'll tell you what you need to do to fix it. And if I can't tell you in 2 days, you don't have to pay me.
And if all that knowledge is there, you know, all these case studies and historic failures that we've seen are all there, why do you think organizations keep repeating these mistakes?
Because they're not engineers. You see, as an engineer, you spend 4 years at university learning how to prevent failure. They don't teach you in engineering, or certainly not the engineering I learned, to have a rah-rah champagne event and launch the bridge. They teach you all the ways that a bridge can fall down and how to prevent the bridge falling down. So you come out of engineering, or certainly I did, steeped in an awareness of failure and preventing failure. And so my whole approach to ERP is, how do I prevent failure and what is failure? I've just literally 2 days ago completed a 22-page document on the real reasons why ERP implementations fail. And they've got close to nothing to do with technology. And the trouble is that the majority of practitioners have not been schooled that way. They do not think that way. I mean, I had a situation yesterday. I emailed somebody about the 95% failure rate of AI, and he came back and said, you know, kind of like, don't be so negative, concentrate on the positives. I said, no, I'm an engineer. I think about the factors that cause failure, because if I can prevent failure, I'll achieve success. And so I've got a radically different approach to ERP to the norm.
That's interesting. He came back saying you're being negative, whereas really it's realism, isn't it? You know, it's realistic.
Yeah, but people don't want to be real about it. I mean, people get upset about me talking about the 70% ERP failure rate. Don't be so negative. They're successes. I mean, for goodness sake, if bridges failed the way ERP projects failed, no one would drive over a bridge today.
Yeah, excellent. You've just shown me your book there, The Critical Factors for IT Investment Success. In that book, you identified 7 critical factors causing ERP failure. Which of those are still most relevant today? Is it still in the strategic planning? All of them?
All. It hasn't changed. The first one is IT mythology, 30%. which is believing computers are magic and can do things they can't do. And we're seeing a mass of that around AI at the moment. Secondly, it's a lack of executive custody. CEO is not the custodian of the ERP. If you make anybody else the custodian, it's biased to a particular silo. They don't understand all the areas. You end up with politics because you've got equal status people sitting around a table and they can't agree because you don't have a decision maker to break that in the form of the CEO. CEO doesn't have the time and the knowledge to do it, so you need to back the CEO up with a really experienced senior ERP expert to advise them. But that leadership has to come from the top. The third thing is a lack of strategic alignment, a lack of understanding the essence of the business and how it thrives. Because if you don't understand the essence of the business and how it thrives and reinforce that, you're going to have problems. And I mean, you asked me to look at Lidl. Classic situation.
Yeah. And I mean, you had a really good point to me a few days ago where you say accountability is the leader in turning failure around. So do you see a clear solution for addressing this failure rate today? Is it directly related to accountability?
No, number one, you appoint the chief executive as the and it's custodian, not sponsor. Custodian as in, I am totally responsible for the outcome of this project, and you better believe I'm going to kick ass if you don't work with me. And cascading that all the way down. So to the C-suite. C-suite each take responsible for their respective modules in the ERP. They cascade that down to their senior management, to their management. The whole team is focused. The CEO is sufficiently involved that if Joe and Pete, the CFO and the COO, are butting heads, he's going to knock their heads together and sort them out. Or she, CEO.
Yeah. And there was something you mentioned about almost bringing in sort of certificates, accountability certificates there, which I found interesting.
Yes, absolutely. One of the big issues with so much of what I see on LinkedIn, because I've only really been actively engaging on LinkedIn since late November, and there's just a constant stream of posts about problems with ERP and misdiagnosis of the treatment. So what I advocate is you do a comprehensive war games level testing of the ERP in what I call a laboratory until it's absolutely bedded down, everybody's trained. And you then, before go live, issue a formal piece of paper which says, I, the undersigned, Joe Blogs, hereby certify that with regard to this element of the ERP project, which I'm responsible for, everything is 100% sorted and ready to go live. Signature at the bottom. If you want to go a bit harder, particularly if you're dealing with the implementers, and I therefore confirm that my implementation firm will carry all costs in the event that the certificate has been signed unwisely. You then get the whole team of managers, consultants, etc., in a meeting room with the CEO in front, and the CEO looks at them and says, right, folks, I just want to confirm I've got this stack of signed certificates here. I'm going to give you one last chance to raise your hand and tell me that there's a problem, because if I go live, if I sign my certificate and we go live and there's a problem and you didn't tell me about it, you're not going to be my favorite person. And then once that's happened, you go live, because you have this syndrome. Oh, we sit around the table. Yeah, no, we're okay. We're okay. We're okay. You go live. I mean, the LinkedIn is studded with reports of all sorts of issues after go live. There's a whole thing of adoption. Adoption is something you get in the laboratory. Adoption is something you get on day one when the CEO says, I adopt this thing, it's my child, it's going to work, and you're going to help me to make it work. Adoption is not something that happens after go live. The rationale is completely back to front, which is why I say that the norm in terms of ERP implementation is upside down or back to front, whichever language suits you. And that's where my ERP implementer accelerator methodology comes in. It's an end-to-end methodology as to how you run ERP projects or ERP remediations so that you don't have these problems that we're talking about. It's designed to prevent failure.
And you've deployed that 7-step ERP accelerator to fix
Well,
failing ERP systems.
I've been doing it instinctively since 1991. I only, I'm an engineer. I'm not a marketing guy. And in the middle of last year, I came across somebody who said, you need to turn that into a branded solution. And I sat down and I said, okay, in the successes I've had, how did I get there? Number one, the chief executive was the custodian. Number two, it was strategically aligned. Number three, we did precision configuration. And so I sat down and I unpacked what was in my head and documented as the accelerator, which is what I'm pushing today.
Could you talk us through a bit more about that approach, James, those 7 steps?
Okay, so what it says is the first thing you do before you embark on an ERP project is what I call diagnose. So you look at your present system and you say what's wrong and can it be fixed? And as you quoted earlier, my contention is that 95% of the time it can be fixed. Number two, you say, right, okay, it can be fixed. And out of that, you can come up with, I did an investigation once for a client where I came up with a 100-page report and said, these are all the things you need to fix. They were on the point of trashing the ERP. They took my advice and the ERP lasted another 8 years.
Wow.
But it's things about the way people act. It's about the configuration. It's about bits of customization. It's about everything we need to do. But if you go in with the mindset that this ERP is a 20-year investment minimum, and I'm not going to trash it unless there is some horribly, horribly wrong situation. Like the software is 15 or 20 years old and it's not supported and it's not maintainable and then you replace it. But you don't go in and say, well, look, 5 years ago we put in, and this is like Birmingham. 1999, we put in SAP ECC. It's working fine. Now SAP have come with S4HANA and they're sunsetting ECC. So we'll have to change, but we feel betrayed by SAP, so we'll go with Oracle. The answer to that is you go back to SAP and you say, right, I'll see you in court. I have the right to maintain and repair SAP ECC and I'm not going to change and you're going to support me. Otherwise, I'm going to sue you. So diagnosis coming at it from a point of view, it probably can be fixed. You then, together with that, put in place executive custody. You back the CEO up with somebody like myself who's got the wisdom and the ERP experience to guide the CEO so that the CEO leads. You then analyze the strategic essence of the business and you find all the areas where the ERP is not fully supporting that. And you put plans in place to fix it. Then, and only then, are you in a position to make a decision. And I'm just walking you through the accelerator step by step. Then you make a decision. You've got all the facts. You've done your analysis. You've got the custody sorted out. You've got the strategy sorted out. And now you take a final decision, re-implement, remediate, or replace. Take that decision sober, conscious of the fact that if you go for a new ERP, there is a massive iceberg below the water of hidden costs that typically an ERP project, if you quantify all the costs, all the hidden stuff, the disillusioned people, the people who work, the first project I did, I worked sort of till 11, 12 o'clock at night, 4 or 5 days a week. I was absolutely exhausted by finished. And eventually I resigned because I just didn't feel I was recognized for the effort I made. And that's a cost to the business because I was quite a senior person playing a key role in the business. And they lost me because they didn't recognize the sacrifices I was making. And that's a real cost of that ERP project. And so you look at all of those costs and you say, you know what, remediation is actually now very attractive. And Lidl should have done that. And we'll talk about that, I guess, later. You've said to me you want to talk about it. So the next step is what I call precision configuration. And what that is right down to the basics of a strategically designed, high precision chart of accounts, dimensions, item class, etc. And by precision, I mean very, very structured content, hierarchical as in indented items and dots in the codes to measure the hierarchy so that you can roll up the chart of accounts to the headlines literally with a couple of mouse clicks. And once you've done that throughout your ERP, suddenly the ERP comes from being a mundane operational system down here, which is a pain in the butt to use, to a strategic resource up here where you can answer any question you can think of the data that's in the ERP just like that. You get away from this thing of reports constantly changing, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've done the precision configuration, you take the ERP into the laboratory. The laboratory is simply a place that simulates the real world. And it's a room with computers around, and you bring people in. You say, right, let's take the order to cash thing for a start. I don't like the word process. There's too much wrong thinking about process. So somebody picks up the phone. There's client types in the order, goes to the warehouse. They pick it, they pack it, they dispatch it, they issue the notification to that it's been dispatched. They issue the invoice. The invoice gets sent out. There's a bit of a delay with payment, so there's a bit of credit control, and eventually it ends up getting paid. And they can trace that whole thing through the general ledger and through the different facets. And you war game that. So you say, who is the most difficult customer to deal with, and what is the most difficult product to support? And you work that, and you you say, oh, that's not quite right, that's not quite right, get that right. And when you've done that for every possible scenario, then you can say, okay, we're now ready. And then you develop a complete portfolio of reports for daily reports, day-end reports, weekend reports, monthly reports, quarterly reports, annual reports. Because once you have precision configuration, you hardly ever have to change the reports. So you get out of a mindset where you are forever spending money and time and people maintaining reports and writing new reports, to a point where your BI now becomes a strategic resource that you can literally have the vision, the dream of a few big screens in your boardroom, and literally you can just go in there to the ERP and say, what happens if we do this? What happens if we do that? Once you've done all of that and you've documented all, you train all your staff. So you bring the staff in, every single user who is going to have fingers on the keyboard, hands on the mouse, and you war game each of them, so that by the time they've finished, they're properly trained. And the metaphor for that is the way most ERPs are trained is a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation and maybe an hour or 2 hours at the keyboard with rubbish data. And that's kind of metaphorically like I operate a fleet of 16-wheeler goods lorries. So I train my drivers who've never driven a vehicle before with a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation, and then I drive them around the empty parking lot for half an hour, and then I load the truck and send them out on the road, and I wonder why people get killed. And people do this all the time, and there's a whole body of knowledge about how you deal with badly implemented ERPs after the fact. So you do that, then you go through the and I call that Prove It Works, which culminates with that certificate we spoke about a minute ago. Then Make It Work, which is a robust decision. The CEO has finally signed that certificate. They go live. The go live has been wargamed as well. So the go live absolutely is flawless. The next morning, the staff walk into the office. They sit down at their computers with the new software, and they say, oh, yes, this is what we've been working on. Where do you need hypercare? And then you go live, and the last step in the whole thing is thrive, and that is that it's an agenda. The part of what I'm saying is that the ERP is a strategic resource. It needs to be managed by the executive committee. So what I'm saying is there needs to be an agenda item on the monthly executive meeting which says, is there anything we should be doing more with the ERP? Are there any issues with the ERP? If so, let's sort them before they become a big thing. And you curate the data. So part of what this is, in the training, you train people, proper capitalization, proper spelling, no rubbish data. Because one of the things that many ERP consultants are guilty of when they're training, they just type rubbish. And you train the users to type rubbish, and then you have a whole big thing after go live with the data's rubbish. Well, the data is rubbish because you never trained people not to make it rubbish. You taught them, in fact, to make it rubbish.
Mm.
And that's it. And it's underpinned then by this thing that I call the engineering approach, which is that you design against failure. And part of that is you make it part of the culture. If there's a problem, you talk about the problem, not this thing of, oh, I'll keep quiet because I'm going to get my head bitten off if I say there's a problem with this. No, you want a culture which says, if you are aware of a problem and you don't tell me about it, I'm going to be very unhappy with you. And so you get people to open up. I could talk for hours.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was going to ask what sort of time period you look for training on these new systems, but I guess you shouldn't be setting a time limit. It should be a case of only once you're capable.
Once a bridge is not built, and you can set a 2-year deadline to build a bridge, but I promise you, if the bridge is not complete and there's a great big gaping void, you're not going to put people driving over that bridge.
Mm.
So why do it with ERP? You don't go live until it's all bedded down. And anybody who sets an arbitrary deadline for an ERP implementation is being reckless. You need to do a detailed analysis. You need to say realistically, and I like to work with lower bound, upper bound estimates. So you say in the most realistic scenario, it's not going to take us less than a week to do this piece. And if it really goes badly, it's not going to take us more than 2 weeks. So you add all of the highs and lows up, you end up with a median, which you says, okay, so this project is going to take not less than 18 months and not more than 2 years. Let's work on a provisional plan of, a year and 9 months. And with the understanding that if something doesn't work and then at the planned go live date, you're not ready, well, you're just going to have to move it out. But not in a way that it happens so often that because it's being hacked and badly run, the deadline keeps moving. No, we've got this project under control. It's tight, it's well run. And you know what? This has taken a bit longer than we thought it would take for good reason. And we've been managing time and cost all along. But realistically, it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to be another month or another 2 months or whatever the case may be.
Delayed for a good reason. That's the difference.
Delayed for a good reason.
I think we should.
Because you've been sloppy.
Yeah, I think we should touch a bit more on how you say, I think 95% of cases where ERP are failures, they can be remediated. They're not has to be replaced. You touched on Birmingham City Council there being an example. Why do you think program directors and advisors, they're coming in and they're so hasty to just say, right, you need a replacement? What do you think's driving that?
Tech focus. They just focus on the tool, not on the ambit of the tool in the business. And if you just look at the tool, well, it's actually only going to take us a week to rip out the ERP and put in another ERP. So it seems simple. When you expand that and you say, these are all the hidden costs that have gone into that investment, and we're now going to trash that investment. No, I don't think so. And part of it is a syndrome that is driven by the industry. The thing to remember is everything goes through an S-curve. As it matures. ERP is mature. I don't care what people say. There's this thing, somebody said it to me the other day, no, the technology is moving so fast. I don't buy that. The classic metaphor there, if you go back to about 1960, the Concorde flew in about 1960, but the Boeing 747 also flew in about 1960. And what people were saying is the airline industry is moving so fast, we can't keep up. We're going to have to develop more planes like Concorde. They got Concorde in the air. It flew from Paris to London, and people on the ground said, we don't like the sonic boom. We forbid you to fly over land at supersonic speed. So 80% of Concorde's market just evaporated like that because the technology, Concorde was a fabulous piece of technology, but the underlying business concept was flawed. The Boeing 747 was just a stretched 707 with a little thing on top so they could put a nose so they could land stuff in. And they developed it for the US Defense Department. And somebody said, I wonder what happens if we put seats in it. The most successful aircraft ever. And they're still flying today to not a large extent. Concorde's been sitting in museums for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I have a hunch, and I'm going to probably get shot for this, but I think there are a couple of new ERPs that are going to turn out to be Concordes.
Would you go as far as say they are more AI native?
Well, AI native, gimmicky. The thing is, if you just go back to Birmingham, SAP ECC from 1999. SAP came along and said, what, we're going to discontinue support. You have to move to S/4HANA. And Birmingham, and this is my surmise, okay? I don't have first-hand evidence of this, but my surmise is Birmingham say, you know what, you've betrayed us. We're going to go to Oracle. So they go to Oracle for all the wrong reasons, when the correct answer was, no, we have invested tens of millions of pounds in getting ECC to run the way we want it to run. And there is no way on this earth that we are going to scrap ECC, and there's no way on this earth that you're going to stop supporting us. And if you want to stop supporting us, we will take you to court. It's a different mindset.
Mm.
You can't take and Lidl are the same situation, not quite the same because they had their own bespoke software. But somebody with a mindset of we've got to keep pace with technology says, we need to scrap this and start again. So we go to SAP. We know on day one that it's strategically incompatible. We've got this driver of how we price our products, which our bespoke system handles perfectly, and that's how we've been so successful and got to a place where Lidl has got operations all over the world. And we say, well, no, we're going to abandon that and trash it, and we'll move to SAP. And then we spend 7 years trying to make modifications to SAP to do something which on day one we should have said, SAP can't do it. They're out of the running. And if they'd done the whole diagnose process that I talked about, they end up after 7 years and 500 million euros. They're saying, let's just fix our present system. They could have done that on day one and saved themselves 500 million euros and maybe spent 50 million euros and added some fancy bits and pieces, including if they wanted to, they could have added some AI on top of it. Part of the problem is that we've got into, I cut my teeth with computers in 1972 with punch cards and Fortran on a mainframe. I've written software myself. I've designed software myself. I know what you can do with software, and it's pretty much limitless. There's this kind of mindset that if I don't take out of the box whatever, sure, that's dangerous territory. No. If you get the right people with the right attitude and the right process, you can do magic things with computers. We talk about the magic things that somebody else can do with computers. Why don't we do magic things with our piece of software? And that's what Lidl, but if Lidl are handling it correctly, which is anybody's guess right now, I didn't find any evidence for or against, but if they're handling correctly, if they want to tack a bit of AI on, or by all means, tack some AI on. There is no fundamental reason to replace old software. If you do, I haven't done this for a couple of years, but if you do a search on Google for the use of COBOL, certainly 5 years ago, Google was saying that COBOL is still one of the most prevalent programming languages in the world because there's 30-year-old code. I mean, certainly in some countries, if you go to an auto bank and put your card in, there's COBOL sitting at the back end. There was a bank in South Africa that spent R1 billion trying to implement SAP, and eventually they fell back to their COBOL systems.
Wow.
It's a different mindset.
Yeah.
We don't do it with buildings. We don't do it with. It's you've got this huge infrastructure. ERP is infrastructure. It's not. It's not. It's not like Microsoft Word or something like that.
Yeah. Let's stick with that example of Lidl's ERP program. It was scrapped after 7 years, and it cost them around 500 million euros. You mentioned to me that you could identify the problem and solution within 2 days. So what was the fundamental issue there, and what would you have advised?
The fundamental issue there was tech focus. Somebody got it into their head that because the software was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years old, it had to be replaced. Not because there was a business driver which said it had to be replaced, purely a tech decision. And part of what went wrong with Lidl, there is no indication that the CEO had anything to do with the ERP until after 7 years, the CEO signed the order instructing them to abort the project. It was run by an IT guy at the executive level. But the problem is that the majority, you're going to have IT people listening, and I'm going to upset them. But the fact is that the majority of IT people do not have an empathy with what's necessary for the business to succeed. So there's that. There was no executive custody. There was no process that sat down at the beginning and said strategically, the way that we price is absolutely organically fundamental to our business. We dare not, and we cannot, and we will not consider any software that is going to mess with that. I have it that in 2 days they could have determined that SAP was not suitable. One day to crystallize the strategic essence of the business, and one day to establish that SAP couldn't do that. But you've got to go in with the right attitude.
And what sort of takeaways are there for CFOs, CEOs from that failure? Regardless of what industry they're in, what are they going to take away from that?
I think the key a couple. Number one, the CEO has to get involved, not as an observer, but as an active participant. And the CEO needs to be backed up with somebody with the right mindset and the right experience set. Number two, whatever you do before you do anything else, get crystal clear what the strategic drivers of the business are. This thing that I call the essence, the strategic essence. Why does the business exist? How does it compete? How does it differentiate? And how does it make money? If we take Lidl, just stay with Lidl for a moment. Lidl got to a point where they were doing so well that they could throw away 500 million euros. And the existing system got it there. So any conversation, any mindset which says this software is obsolete, we need to get rid of it, is fundamentally defective. You can't say the software that got us to where we are, that we can afford, and I mean, obviously they didn't know this 7 years ago, but the software that got us to where we are today has been so successful that we can afford to put in a new ERP. And it's got to be trashed. What can I say? Then you've got to have executive custody all the way through, and you've got to have a sensible discussion, and you've got to look at it from an engineering point of view. An engineering point of view says, you know what, this machine is working perfectly well. There's no reason to replace it. And the thing is, I've had this conversation on a number of occasions with tech people around fringe ERPs, bespoke systems, etc. And when you get the right tech person in the room and you say, right, we've got this technology, it's 15 years old, it's totally bespoke. Can you support it? I had a situation once. I was working for a client in the medical services area, and they had a bespoke software ERP that was running 50 practices around the country. And they were taken over by a life insurance company. Somebody said, this is obsolete, we must replace it. So they brought me in. This is before I thought the way I think today, and it was part of the reason I think the way I think today. I traveled the world. I got a number of bids in, and we established it was going to cost millions to buy a system to replace this, and there would be a whole lot of bespoke work. And the shareholder said, no, we don't have the appetite for that sort of investment. So they said to me, what can you do? I said, okay. I spoke to the developer. I identified him as a critical risk because he was just himself and he was the only one who knew his way around the source code. I said, right, we'll hire 2 competent developers. He'll train them. They'll shadow him. They'll document everything, flow charts, source code. In 6 months, they knew the software inside out. Next week, he went hang gliding, had an accident, and was killed.
Wow.
But we had gone from where 6 months before that would have been a mission critical failure to a point where we said, well, it was a nice guy. Sorry about that, but we've got 2 other people who know how to maintain the software. And that was supposedly obsolete. It was like Windows 3.2. So if you have the right conversation with the right people, they're going to say to you, yes, you know what, we can maintain that software. And you say, okay, well, what a database. It's a different mindset.
Okay, James. This last question is set up for more sharing your insight and advice with listeners. So if a leadership team is about to embark on an ERP program, what is the one single most important thing they should prepare to avoid implementation failure?
Clearly decide that the CEO is custodian. Clearly define what the strategic drivers of their business are, and clearly decide why they want to embark on that project. And after that, they can give me a call and I'll come and help them.
Excellent, James. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. You shared so much valuable experience, walked us through what ERP failure really looks like and how it can be fixed. For listeners, especially CFOs, CEOs, and transformation leaders, the key takeaway today is that ERP failure is not inevitable and replacement is rarely the answer. So, James, thanks again for joining us.
If I can just add one chip on that one. You can have an ERP that does exceptional things for your business and takes it right the way up there. And I can tell you how to do it.
Excellent. Thank you, James. And thank you for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode. See you, James.
Radio. Cheers. Bye.